Hi, everybody. Those that are viewing, my name is Enoch. I'm on the Vancouver Startup Week team, and I want to welcome you to Vancouver Startup Week 2021. Before we begin, I just wanted to do some land acknowledgements. I want to take this moment to acknowledge that we are grateful to be virtually gathered here on Indigenous land. So regardless of where you are joining us from, I'm grateful to be on a traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. I'm privileged to live, work, and play on these lands. And yes, just wanted to thank you once again for joining us and for this special session of navigating the growing M&A market in British Columbia, a fireside chat with local successful CEOs hosted by Osler. And as the session is part of a VSW founder track, it's partly supported by Sage Accounting. So the quick plug for Sage is that, well, Sage knows that you didn't start your business to become an accountant. So sort of any accountants out there. But the plug for Sage Accounting, oh, there we go. We had the hand raising from Catherine. We love our accountants, and Sage does as well. And that's why Sage Accounting keeps your business organized and running smoothly. So track your cash flow, send out your voices, and get paid quickly. And you can do all of that by visiting the Sage Accounting booth to access their free guides and templates to starting your business finances the right way. Plus, you can get an exclusive VSW discount if you're ready to switch from Excel. And with that, I also wanted to give a special shout out to Osler for being our events partner and also a sponsor. VSW couldn't happen without the continuous support from our local sponsors. So thank you so much, Mark and Justin, and to the Osler team. One final thing is during the session, if any of the viewers and attendees have questions, please post them in a Q&A or in a chat, and I'll be monitoring them on the Whova session. You can also upvote the questions when you see the polls. And later on, I'll be helping to facilitate the audience questions. But with that, I'm passing over to you, Mark and Justin. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thanks so much, Enoch. And good afternoon, everybody. For anybody listening before we kicked off, in the behind the scenes aspect of our discussion, we're going to try to replicate that over the next hour here. As Enoch mentioned, my name is Mark Longo. I am co-chair of the Emerging and High Growth Companies Group at the law firm Osler, based out of our Vancouver office. On behalf of Osler, we are very pleased to once again be a sponsor and participant in Vancouver Startup Week and look forward to being able to get together in person next time around. I want to welcome all of you to this virtual M&A Fireside Chat, which I have the privilege of moderating over the next hour. If you have been following recent headlines, you know that the M&A market in the Canadian tech sector has thrived throughout COVID. Deal volumes are increasing and valuations are very frothy. Canadian and BC tech companies are increasingly on the radar for North American and international strategic acquirers, private equity, and growth equity firms. We are very fortunate today to be joined by two CEOs who have successfully exited in this current market environment. So before we dive in, a few brief intros. Catherine Dahl is founder and CEO of Beanworks, a SaaS accounts payable automation provider, which exited to Paris-based publicly traded Quadient in March of 2021. Next is Damon Ramsey, founder and CEO of Input Health, an electronic health records platform provider, which was acquired by TELUS. And of course, every panel needs a good lawyer. So we are joined by Justin Young, my partner in crime in the Vancouver office in our EHG group, who happened to also be lead partner in both the Beanworks and the Input Health acquisitions. I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes or so peppering our panelists with questions. And then, as Enoch said, we will open it up to audience questions. So please jot your questions into the chat function as we go. So without further ado, let's kick off the interrogation. I'm going to turn it to our CEOs first. And the first question is, why now? Why did you choose to exit at this point in time? Had you considered exiting in the past, and what led to 2021 being the right time for the exit?
Catherine, you go ahead.
Let me start with you, Catherine.
Yeah, it's easier if someone just tells me.
When I'm with Osler, I just do what I'm told these days. Just kidding. Justin knows better than that. Why now? Well, actually, I would say our board had the foresight to, I don't know how they figured it out, other than patterns of history. They knew something was going to happen bad in 2020. They didn't know what. They felt it in the air. I don't know, it was a little voodoo-like at the time, but both Michelle Scarborough and Joe Maxwell from FinTop Capital were like, something's going to happen, and we need to be primed and ready for being on the right side of that. And one way to do that was to position ourselves to be affordable to a certain tier of M&A, sort of the sub 200 million genre, I guess, is where they were saying is if we position ourselves to be there, then it's likely if something bad happens, we can get ourselves purchased before that, or shore up our cash flow without going too crazy, that kind of thing. So we had done a tiny round, internal investors only, to shore up the bank account, and then out of nowhere we were growing through the pandemic after the kind of that first little what happened in the first month, and then we started growing like crazy as we were before. And so we got some letters of interest that popped up in the fall of 2020, and a strategic had shown up just before the pandemic struck. And in fact, the day I talked to them, I had lunch with Justin, and he's the only person I told about this company name, because I was like, oh, I don't really know if this is real or not. And I thought it was just all silly. I didn't think anything would really come of it. And the pandemic slowed it down a bit, but then they picked it back up again. And really at the time, our board looked at it and said, you have no idea what the future holds. Things could go good, could go bad, but if we hold out, we've got to hold out a lot longer. And my founders and I have been at this for me 10 years, and for them 9. And so, you know, you get tired after a while, and you sort of want to bear some fruit from your efforts. And a bird in hand, a really good one, is better than none. Or a potentially big one that may never happen later. So we had a few offers at the time, and the strategic came in and saw the offers and said, we'll have to outbid you all. And that, so it looked, you know, it's just good timing. And did we leave too early? Maybe, but we have the opportunity to continue to do what we do now in a bigger entity, and stay in Vancouver, keep growing. There's still lots of Beanworks future out there. And now we don't have to worry about running, you know, looking for money, which was always not, well, for my company at least. I always had to keep looking for money. Or Damon, you didn't have to do that.
I was always looking, not necessarily finding. And Mark, just to be clear, you mentioned Justin's a good lawyer. I thought he was a psychiatrist. So am I on the right call? Because that's how I used Justin for years, is essentially a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist. And Justin, I don't know if you remember these conversations, but you know, there was multiple iterations of, is this the right time? Should I be doing something? And you know, Input Health, which is in the digital health industry, we bootstrapped largely. Right at the end, right before we had done a little bit of debt financing with BDC through an excellent group led by Rob Dennison. But it was always like, for me, as a mission-oriented founder, an uncomfortable notion to exit, because it's like my baby. And Catherine, like for example, we didn't have a board, so I was literally the one decision maker on this. And it's a lot of pressure because you represent your team as well. We had obviously other shareholders, but it was essentially a Damon decision. And the beginning of the year, if you had told me that I would be selling my company to TELUS, I would have said you're absolutely insane, because we had actually defined ourselves as the antithesis of TELUS, TELUS Health specifically. And it just so happened that as the year went on, and there was of course the pandemic, as I observed the high degree of activity in the digital health industry, it became clear to survive, we either need to raise money, decide to go the IPO route, or consider acquisition. And acquisition in the context of TELUS Health, which I don't regret, and Justin, we haven't even had the chance to even debrief really. It was not so much an exit as an entry to the next level, because then I was able to take what we'd built, enter a large business that had a much more substantial footprint, and now spread it across the country, which is what we've been doing. So we had like 1% market share. TELUS Health has 40% in Canada. Now our product is the one that's going to be able to take that 40%. And that for me is an entry as much as an exit.
That's great answers, both of you. I think a couple of themes. One is the readiness to exit and being prepared for that potential inbound interest. Another is really reading the tea leaves of the market environment and seizing the moment when it's there. And clearly both of your spaces became very hot during COVID. So that's great. And the third thing I say is I think Justin did a minor in psychology at McGill back in the day. Is that true?
Most important part of the job. Actually, Mark, just on that point, if either Catherine or Damon want to comment, and it goes to the psychology here, did the massive upheaval of COVID ever sort of resonate to you to say, boy, I guess anything is possible? And so, you know, when you're building a business, you always think, well, I'll just grow it more and more. And all of a sudden you see this event where you think, if I was an entrepreneur in X industry, my whole 10 years or life's work would be gone overnight. Like, did the frailty of the global economy and the influence of a pandemic ever make you think maybe as you said, Catherine, a bird in the hand, like it's time to take the chips off the table? Or was that not really part of it?
I'll take this one. I was in Mexico when we had to call an emergency board meeting to decide what to do. Close the office, send everybody home. And while I was in Mexico, I was like freaking out. I was like, oh my God, what if this just kills everything? What if this kills the economy in the world? What if everything just falls apart and all of our existing customers go and all of our revenue disappears? And because we were doing this, we'd had 100% growth year over year for like almost 3 years. And it's like, if everything went belly up, and I did in my head, I went all the way to the entire world going to a massive long depression, and all this hard work, investment, my own personal dollars and time and everything, for sure. I freaked out, I think, the entire first 4 weeks of the pandemic, sitting alone at home wondering, what if this really took, because we had a 40% drop in transaction volume. Wow. Even though our revenue only dropped by 10% because of the way we were pricing our product at the time, but we had a 40% drop in actual, that's an indication of what was going on in the economy in North America in the first 4 weeks of this. Then it did a V, it just stopped, started going up and continued to go up, and kind of has done that ever since. But that first big drop was scary. I was like, oh my God, like I thought we were finally coming to the end of this race, because the board had said, you know, something's gonna happen this year. If not this year, it'll be early 2021. We kind of had that 18-month window of either something will come our way or we'll go out and do a process. But that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of our investors wanting their return. And so mentally I was prepared for that. But all of a sudden it looked like the rug could have been pulled out from underneath us. And yeah, I totally panicked. I don't know about Damon, but I certainly
Yeah, we had a different situation because we were in the health industry. COVID was actually an accelerator. So like virtual care, for example. So it was actually almost the opposite, where COVID would be encouragement to keep going and go it alone. But on the flip side, that calculus that a founder has on risk tolerance related to environmental factors, that did occur. So, you know, while COVID wasn't an encouraging factor in getting into M&A, all the increased cybersecurity, the ransomware attacks, all of these things that happen around you, when you realize that you can disappear suddenly without the protection of a larger entity that can assure your survival. I mean, and that did weigh on me, aside from the fact that we, of course, covered all our bases. Those are some real issues that, especially in certain industries, you have to face as a smaller entity, whether you can weather those storms or whether they're actually existential, whether a single event could take away everything that you built over a decade. So 100%, aside from COVID, those are definitely parts of the consideration.
Absolutely. Now, in both of your cases, you ended up getting acquired by strategic acquirers. Had you also thought about looking at financial acquirers such as private equity funds? Did you have either of those companies on your radar prior to the M&A discussions happening? And yeah. I'll start with you, Catherine.
Yeah, we had 3 letters of intent in hand when the strategic returned to the table. They were all from a financial VC or a PE firm like backers and that would have been 2 bite of the apple. The news wouldn't have been that exciting. Would have been half the valuation, but twice as much opportunity because we all would have kept going, and we would either merging in with another entity and forming a larger thing that would then go on to be something much, in theory, much bigger. But it would have been another 3 to 4 year run, and that would have been tough on my co-founders to say yes to, I think.
Absolutely. How about you, Damon?
Mark, we weren't really seeking this. It came to us, and it came to us in a way that I think, Justin, you would be able to comment better than I would, but probably unique in a sense because, we were involved in a process, and then somehow that information had gotten to a strategic. That private equity was never in the equation. It was always about how do we double down on our strategy and get our product out there. So private equity, while it would serve those needs, probably doesn't need us. And we were considering ourselves as very important for the company and its survival of the product. So we went through an entire process that right at the tail end then converted into another one where strategic came in, and that deal pressure had been basically artificially created. It was not planned. But for the folks that are on the call who are maybe in these conversations actively, I will say that having 2 parties or more, like Catherine, you had, that makes such a difference, and your confidence level just increases so much. And I would say that being open to any conversation makes sense, as long as you're aligned from a vision and strategy perspective.
Yeah, that competitive tension is so critical in getting the best deal and making sure that the buyer that ends up at the end of the day is providing you with the best terms. Now, let me turn to our resident lawyer on the panel, Justin. Catherine alluded to a private equity style model. Can you describe a little bit the difference between a private equity sort of financial buyer and how that might be structured versus a strategic acquirer?
Sure, yeah. And I think there's been a little bit of convergence on those 2 things, Mark, in my experience, what I've seen. But generally with a strategic buyer, they tend to buy the whole business, and they would be looking to port over the really important employees and obviously the product lineup. We can talk about strategics have different reasons why they're picking up companies, but generally speaking, it's buy the whole company, all the security holders cash out entirely, and then your incentives are typically around your employment compensation and whatever kind of incentive programs they have. Whereas in my experience, financial buyers, depending on the stage of your company, are usually looking to either pick you up and roll the management team over with retaining a significant equity stake in the acquired business because they need you to be incentivized to grow it, often to sell to another financial buyer at a bigger and later stage. And so you've still got to hit your performance metrics. And so they engineer the deals differently, I find, than often the strategics do. Now, having said that, I think there are a lot of deals we've seen where the strategics are using their equity, I've done 3 recent deals where the founder CEOs were asked to leave a significant portion of equity on the table. So anywhere from sort of 10 to 50% of their equity would be tied up, with the intention being that they continue to stay in the business, help it grow, and really execute on performance. And not necessarily just through an earnout, but actually an opportunity where the value is fixed, but you get paid out over time with maybe a slight incremental increase. And so I think, these large strategics realize that the entrepreneurs and the founders are so important to the success of integration and growth that some of the deal terms are actually converging a little bit from a founder perspective. Neither Damon nor Catherine retired and went to go sailing or fishing or traveling or whatever. They're both probably working harder now almost than you did before, maybe on different things, but yeah, it's that you're committed, right? So it's interesting.
Yeah, I can confirm that I definitely work more now It's a different type of work, a lot more. So, I mean, I've gone from a company of roughly 50 people, and Justin, I don't know if I've even told you this, but now I oversee 670, and that might grow to like 1,200. So the better I'm doing, the headcount seems to grow. And I'm like, maybe I should stop doing well so that they stop throwing more heads, because it's actually quite a different skill set to lead a group of 50 compared to 1,000 people. Like, it's a whole, and so my life has really converted from startup to now corporate, and learning how to be startup in corporate, which is really, really tricky. And so I have 1,000 books, literally, I can see them behind my laptop, all like equipping me with new knowledge that helps to sort of double down on this new world. It's really exciting, actually.
How long has it been for you, Damon?
It's been 6 months, feels like 6 years. And that's another part, which if anyone is going through these processes, if you can carve out that time, like 1 week, 2 weeks, because to go straight from a process, land into a new environment, it's just psychologically quite, and there's been no break. Like, Justin, literally there was Christmas, and that's when I was reading some books, and then straight into it. Catherine, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm 10 weeks in, 6 weeks in. I've lost track. March 23rd. I've tried a couple of times to take a couple of days off. Not enough, like 2 days there. And I wouldn't say I'm not working more. I'm definitely working less.
You're smart, obviously, Catherine. You're much smarter than I am.
We have almost 100 people, and it's not that I'm smarter. I just had a board, and that consumed a lot of my time. So I have a really good number two. He's working a lot harder and a lot more, but he made me a promise. So he's going to work his ass off to commit to that promise. But half of my job went away because I spent half my time worrying about investors, the board, legal stuff, cap table. Where's my cash runway coming from? All of that treasury management, because I was a CFO, I have a VP of finance, but I worked a lot. As an accountant, I couldn't keep my fingers out of that pot. So I spent a lot of time reiterating that, and I would spend my evenings looking at spreadsheets, trying to make sure we had the cash we needed and where's it gonna go. And now because they take OpEx in this new world and it's run by a totally different siloed group of people. And my new finance guy reports into them. And so I'm like, I don't have to worry about money anymore. so people are like, can we buy this computer? I'm like, don't ask me. Absolutely. I would have been like, what? Well, what do you need it for? And I'd be all over that. And so that half of my job just disappeared overnight. That was so weird. So I was a little oddly bored in the first little bit. And now most of my mornings are filled with meetings with we jokingly say my European overlords. They're lovely people, but that's what we jokingly affectionately call them. And there's lots and lots and lots of meetings, and that's what I'm doing right now is lots and lots of meetings. And now I'm in this process of we're about to amalgamate all their software divisions into one. So Quadient wants to be known as a software company, and so they're looking at us and they're like, you guys are really good at this, and this. Okay, we're going to start adopting your stuff. So we're in this weird transitions place. But I will say there's a strange feeling. I was trying to find someone else who has been in it, because I'm just like, I don't know what to do with myself. It's a weird, it's a weird place. It's a very weird place. It's not like they can fire me either. So it's another, never been in a role in my life where I don't have to worry about being fired. If they want me to go, they have to give me a lot of money. So
nice, very nice. Well, a few themes coming out of that. One of them is post-acquisition, your roles have changed. And I think that that's inevitable, particularly going into a much larger organization. In each of your case, it's death by meetings. I'm sure you've got your calendar is literally all day, every day is very scheduled. And the other thing that I picked up from both of you is for a tip for founders going through the process, trying to carve some time for yourself post-closing before embarking on your next chapter.
Yeah, that's really important.
I think it's important, but I don't know how you do it, because your acquirer is like in a big hurry once the deal's done, right? They have to see, like, or as a public trade, well, TELUS got to be the same, but they want results now. So they're not, well, you guys all just take a 2 or 3 week holiday. Although their M&A team, I will say, did definitely take time off in the little stall period. They all disappeared for a holiday. And I was like, should I take a week off? But how do I take a week off, which I tried to, like during that little delay there in March, Justin, where we had a bit of a stall.
Yeah.
And just had to wait for the days to pass. And I was like, well, what do I do now? And so I tried to take a couple of days off, but it's like, it's not a vacation. Like
that, you know, on that theme, even pre-acquisition, like when you're in a process, taking that time off is also important, even a day, because your judgment, when you're fatigued, you'll make decisions, or you'll say things, or you'll do things, you'll act out in a way that maybe you wouldn't if you had slept a little bit better. If you had decided like, okay, the world's not going to stop.
Yeah.
If Saturday and Sunday, like we just say, everyone pause right now. Justin's probably like, oh, well, Damon, you did try to accelerate it to the fastest deal possible in human history. But there is an element where I think that the pace of work has increased so much because of the digital revolution. It's made it so that pausing is so necessary for you to be on a right playing field to make a good decision, and especially during these times, because you can make, and Justin, you probably saw this with me, where I would get fatigued and I'd be like, what's that clause? It doesn't really matter, just forget about it. But like he put me in my place, like, no, that is actually really important. Like don't skip that one, right?
Yeah, no, that's definitely part of our job. You know, Mark, you go through this too, is, you know, we're trying to manage those ups and downs for you, because we know what you're going through, and we know how much you're being asked and taxed. And we also know that entrepreneurs are eternal optimists. And so, you know, you're always willing to discount risk. That's what makes you successful. And so our job is to not unduly burden you with the risk or the downside, but to make sure that you at least think about it twice before you make the decision, right? And try to use our past experience to help you, you know, think through things. And in fact, it's sort of funny that I have the two of you here today that we do, because, you know, Damon, some of the things we went through on your deal specifically were in the back of my mind when Catherine, we were having conversations on some of your deal points. And so, you know, we have the benefit of having gone through this many times, and it helps us each time get a little bit better.
Except I think the famous phrase of my due diligence, or not due diligence, mostly the post-due diligence, pre-close part from Justin was, well, no, I've never seen it. No, I've never seen this before. No, normally this happens at the beginning, not now. This is very unusual.
Catherine had some very unusual things happen in her deal.
I think we need to unpack this a little bit, because it's actually a good segue. What were the tough deal terms in terms of negotiating? I'm going to start with you, Justin, and then Damon and Catherine chime in.
Yeah, well, I'd be interested to hear from their perspective if they agree with me. But I think in both cases, and Damon, this is a little bit more maybe on your first thing you considered. Yeah. In both cases, it's where an entrepreneur is going to stay actively involved and economically invested in the post-closing business, whether through an earnout or some kind of significant, you know, Catherine, you said, well, they'll have to pay me a lot if I leave. So where there is a desire to say, if your business performs this way after closing, you'll get this. To me, that's the hardest thing to negotiate, because we, on the sell side, we're saying, well, that's fine, but we're going to need the tools in order to achieve those outcomes. So if you're controlling the P&L, or you're controlling, you know, whatever, you know, the technology, the sales and marketing, the product pricing, Catherine, or the distribution channel, how can I risk my economics when I no longer am driving the car, right? So to me, that is always tricky. And I think for both of you was a really important part of the discussion. The one thing that was different, Mark, in these two deals is one of the transactions had rep and warranty insurance and one did not. And so that leads to a little bit of a different discussion around reps and warranties and how much of the transaction proceeds are subject to clawback if there's any kind of, you know, concern after the deal closes. So in the cases with rep and warranty insurance, you tend to spend a little bit less time arguing about those things, because the insurer is supposed to take some of that off the table. Although Catherine, you'd probably tell me you still spend a lot more time than you expected to thinking about things like reps and warranties. But you know, I think those those are probably the biggest things. For each of them, when you're dealing with a public company, there are lots of externalities that come into play, whether it's that company's own strategy, that company's timing for rollout or integration or quarterly results, or whatever it is that's driving their cadence that has sometimes nothing to do with your deal is tough to negotiate because it's important to them and not at all important to the founder selling their business. So that's also one where it's hard sometimes to find a common ground.
Yeah, like, you know, for me, Catherine, I imagine you had a very different experience as an accountant. I don't know how much it came through. It probably did come through a lot, Justin. I had decided, because I'm arrogant and a doctor, that I can do everything. And so M&A, whatever, AMM, blah, 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 it's fine. Then I realized that, okay, so like working capital. That was like this term. I'm like, oh, Google working capital. This is pretty like basic, no problem. And then you realize that there's a huge debate on how you're going to define working capital.
Yes.
That's the beginning of definitions. And like for lawyers, that's where you guys live. Like everything's about definitions. I remember somewhere there was a definition of the in one of these, not in our M&A, but in another contract I was reading, like the. So I think that for me, not being familiar with the terminology, the language, and then the significance of the weight of different things. Justin was extremely amazing to work with because he didn't make me feel stupid, even though I knew I was stupid on these things. But he also like allowed for the space for me to prioritize what's important to me as opposed to being directive. And that's why I thought he was a therapist and not a lawyer, because it's a much more intelligent way of moving things forward, is to not say, this is what you should care about, you shouldn't care about this, versus these are reasons why you would care about this. And it's your threshold of risk that will define your behavior on this point. And that worked a lot better for an arrogant son of a bitch like myself.
Okay,
Taylor.
I'm an arrogant accountant. It's all good.
We've got a lot of arrogance on this call.
A lot of arrogance. You have to be a little arrogant to be a CEO, I think, and take a lot of risk. You just have to be confident, maybe not arrogant.
You have to be a CEO and founder. You need to be confident.
Yeah. And for the record, for those listening, neither of these two are arrogant, which tells you something about themselves that they think they are. But in any event,
there you go. So Catherine, over to you in terms of the more challenging deal terms that you experienced in the process. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, 100% for me, it was the management rollover coming in at the last minute, because it was supposed to be an all cash deal and closed by the end of December. So right while he was doing the other deal. So, and Justin was very polite. The internal optimist in me says, of course we can do it. We're organized on our side. We are fast. We can do anything. And we did do it very quickly. I mean, we finished the due diligence by the first week of January, and we started the last week of November. So that was pretty quick, but that was a 24-hour cycle because Europe was sleeping while we were preparing stuff. While we were sleeping, we were reviewing stuff. We got up to questions, we answered them, they got up to the answers. It worked great until we got to the deal. When we had to deal with the lawyers and all the legal paper and the back and forth on that, no longer were we in a 24-hour cycle. It was like an 80-hour cycle. It's like, because it would take Europe, the lawyers would talk about it, then we'd have to wait for Europe to wake up, talk to their lawyers, then come back to their lawyers, and then come back to our lawyers. And that cycle was so painful. And I know Justin was saying, in the old days, we just all get into a room together and hash it out over a few days instead of it dragging on for weeks. It took weeks and weeks to finish that part. And a big chunk of it was this. We were supposed to get board approval at the beginning of January, and they came back and said, nope, someone said lock in Catherine and her revenue person. And they came back and asked only two of us to carve out a chunk of equity, a big chunk of my equity, and then tie it to performance, not just time, and tie it to 3 years, not 2, and so everyone kept telling me, well, that's unusual. That's not normal. It's usually 2 years, and it's usually just time. It's usually this percentage. And so everyone's telling me that I'm being asked to give up way more than I should be giving up and sacrificing. And at the end of the day, Justin had to deal with a whole lot of psychology for me on that side, because that was just like, oh, how do I swallow this very big pill in my throat? Until one of my board members who had this exact same experience decided to finally share that at the very end of the game instead of the beginning of the game. If you just shared all that, Joe had the exact same experience, Justin, literally to the letter. And he he didn't like remember or something until he's like, oh yeah, that happened to me too. Oh yeah, that happened to me too. And I'm like, it would have been nice to have heard that like in November, that they're probably going to come and ask for this. Better be ready. All I got was there's going to be wrenches, but I didn't know what the wrenches would be. And I'm an optimist, so I just assumed, no, I don't think there's going to be wrenches. So that one was really tough because that took weeks, and you're already at that stage where, you know, the board's already got a number in their head. They're all investors. I've got a number in my head. My founders have a number in their head. They're spending the money in their head, you know? So it's like, how do you disappoint everybody? And even though you're kind of getting the crap end of the stick, but they did, to their credit, they juiced it up and said, okay, if we're going to make you sacrifice this, we're also going to give you a really good outcome if you do better than plan. And right now we're doing better than plan. So that's very good. So that's good. And then there was a huge negotiation around that. And that was where it took a lot of Osler skills to get to a reasonable, like they wanted us to, they were going to set it up for failure, really, to be literal. And it's like going in and saying, if we do this, we're going to behave this way and you're not going to like that. And it's we're all going to fail if that's what you want. You want the greater good, or do you want us to fight you for 3 years? And so finally they agreed to take that little term out. And then I don't know, their lawyers were a strange bunch. They just kept business people. The business people seem to agree, and somehow their lawyers couldn't quite get it into a language that would replicate what we discussed.
That international component must be relevant there, where like they're literally speaking a different language in the sense that they're trained differently. The deal terms are probably different. The conventions are different. I mean, I can imagine.
European conventions definitely different in certain structure, but the lawyers were American, so I can't really say they're foreign in that sense. But yeah, I don't know why it was just, that part was the most frustrating part. The whole language back and forth, and then taking it out and then putting it back in, and then rearranging it and putting it back in, and the number of versions of that one document was ridiculous.
Catherine, I don't know how significant this was for you, but Justin, so I was very excited in my first process, and I made the most amateur mistake, despite the fact that he made it very clear and he coached me appropriately, which is the LOI, right? As soon as you've like signed this thing and you get into this exclusivity, you're now like stuck in it, and what you put in there, you're going to be held to. And if it's not clear, then they're going to use that. And that's what's going to create this trading of like, what does this mean actually? So Justin had to be really clear about like, take your time, Damon, like you're not in a rush. This isn't going to disappear overnight. But I was excited, and that eternal optimist was like, these things, like these definitions and things like working capital, which I feel like I should tattoo on my skin now. It just would like come back again and again and again. And if you had like a definition of revenue, like even like the most basic things where you if you're naive like me at that time, you're like, these things are simple, like monthly recurring revenue, we define that. Like we don't need to like write an essay about this, but they are significant, all of them. And that would be my one statement to anyone who's on this call that's going through this kind of process or about to enter. Be very, very knowledgeable about those things that you've talked about, that you've signed up for, because they will not let them slip. They'll hold it to you the entire time.
Yeah, and Damon, on that point, and Mark, I'm sure you'd echo this, is in my experience, what happens from the legal perspective is the CEO of the business being sold typically negotiates the LOI with someone from corp dev. And usually the corp dev folks are part execution, part sales. They're very personable, they're deal makers, they develop a good rapport with you. But the secret that they don't tell you is that while you are usually empowered to change terms later, they're not. And so you develop a great rapport, and you feel like no problem, we'll work it out. But what happens is that person then has masters, and it might be the board, Catherine, it might be whoever within the organization actually calls the shots. And so you have to be careful when you feel like you have a handshake with your corp dev contact that did the LOI. It's not necessarily going to be that person you're negotiating with when it comes to actually executing on your deal. So there's a cautionary tale there. Both of you, what you both did well is you developed champions within the other organization. And I think it's a really critical point. And Catherine, you with Brandon and Natalia could pick up the phone and say, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And Damon, you had your person in the organization who was your champion. And that is for founders out there, like you have to make sure you know if you're selling to a strategic, who's the champion that you're going to actually have that late night call with to say, tell your lawyers, tell your execution folks, this is the deal, and have them support you.
And we kept, I remember you warning me about the LOI thing and the exclusivity piece, and we kept it, I think we kept the LOI fairly light, that we didn't have that problem. But I would say we did have a problem that I didn't see coming. If you're a Canadian company and you're negotiating a deal, put it in Canadian dollars. Because we negotiated in US dollars, and guess what happened to the US currency as the process went on? We lost money, millions of dollars in exchange, when really my entire cap table is pretty much Canadian. We should have just done the whole thing in the right currency in the first place. We're warned. And then the other big one was just about being having your data room from day one and knowing what, but you need to talk to your lawyer about what should be in the data room, so that you're adding to it over time and you're making sure that all the things that you need to have in there. But and the other one, the other big pain was not to do with the acquirer, but to do with internally to set up for success on the paperwork. I had left an option advisor off my options list, and I didn't realize that was a bad thing. Even though I'm pretty sure Justin will tell you, or tell somebody else, that he told me that a long time ago, and I probably forgot. And I said, what do you mean? I have a pool. He's in there. What's it matter? It matters.
Your cap table locked down. That's right, Catherine. That stuff is, you can't avoid it once you're paying X per share on closing.
Yeah,
I think that's all
organized.
Very invaluable for both of you in terms of the sort of lessons learned. I mean, I think what I've heard is, first of all, being due diligence ready, having your data room ready, having a very well cleansed cap table. That is very, very key. I think both of you proved that you were nimble during the negotiation, because inevitably there's going to be changes in the negotiation as you go. I think this conversation was great in terms of the letter of intent phase. There's a race to get to letter of intent, and in so doing, you can make mistakes along the way in the sense of sort of rushing to get something on paper, which then does lock you into exclusivity. So I think, I mean, you clearly were well served with counsel and other advisors to navigate through that. But you know, this process is a lot. It's really hurry up and wait, and various stages, particularly if you're dealing with a large multinational public company as the acquirer, that use the leverage you have to get the right deal terms at the letter of intent would be one sort of key lesson out of all this.
Yeah, I would say that, this concept of time, and Justin was always very reassuring. Like, the folks at Osler were just phenomenal, and it was actually quite heartbreaking. I think it was like 2 days before, I think Justin mentioned, he's like, you realize that this is the end for us. And I was like, what do you mean? And it's like, I'm no longer going to be your lawyer anymore. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, that can't be after this deal. And I was like, it occurred to me, like, this whole journey, like, we've been on this journey for a long time. I remember when you were with a different firm, you had these gargoyles outside your office. I was like, that's wicked for lawyers, especially in Vancouver. It's not Chicago. And this time thing is just really, really subjective, how we perceive the urgency of things and how they perceive the urgency of things. The cooler you are, the calmer you are, I've learned now, I wasn't at that time, the more you have in your advantage. Because ultimately, if you get to that point where you're negotiating, clearly the other side wants you. If you are answering really fast and just being really responsive, it indicates that you really want them, but you don't want them to know that. So just being like dragging your feet could mean hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars extra that you can get just by being a little bit slower and calmer. And probably the smartest folks that do these kinds of negotiations are the ones that have that poker face and are like not emotional at all. And basically, okay, you don't want to do that, that's fine. We're just going to think about it for a while. Let the time tick. And then that other side is just stressing out, what are they doing right now? So that was something that seems obvious now, but I didn't really understand the speed.
I think that's, Damon, that's very astute. And in part, you need to understand where you are in the cycle. And the fact that both of your companies ended up being in very hot spaces at the time you acquired gives you more leverage than, let's say, I mean, I've been through enough cycles coming out of the 2008-09 financial crisis, deals dried up. And so if you had a deal there, you wanted to desperately close it as quickly as possible. Whereas, you know, both of your companies were sort of prized possessions for those acquirers. So you in fact had more leverage to be able to sort of use that time in the negotiation.
Absolutely. I think, like, you know, a book, by the way, that I highly recommend, it's not like an M&A book, but the title of the book is my favorite title of any book, but it also has a lot of really great principles in it. Is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz. This book, I literally always have it next to me, like literally, well, I guess you guys can't see that, Hard Thing About Hard Things. That is, I think, the way that I would define this whole process. It's the hard thing about hard things, which is that there is no right answer at any particular time. There's just a bunch of probabilities and assumptions, and you got to make those decisions. And there just literally is no calculus that will just give you that definitive answer for any point in this M&A process. But making a decision is the best thing that you can do at every juncture, and making a decision and being confident and then not stressing about it and just constantly thinking about it, which is probably what you guys see all the time. That nervousness, which you guys end up being the counselor for. Oh my God, we sent that. Should I have said that? Well, you already did. It's done. You can't take it back. Move on. Get your head right, right? Like that's what Justin was doing the entire time. And again, I'm not paid to say this, but like I can't imagine a better partner to work with than Justin. That relationship though developed over years. And I feel like if I had just met you, Justin, at the time of, you know, starting these processes, it wouldn't have been the same. So have that great relationship with your corporate lawyer and foster it over years. Don't figure that out at the M&A process. That would be horrifying.
Thank you for saying that. I very much appreciated and reciprocated. We love doing deals with clients that we like, right? And that we have that kind of relationship with. So totally appreciated it.
We didn't even get to celebrate, guys. Like, I don't know, Catherine, if you did, but we didn't get, like, there was no closing deal, dinner or whatever, nothing.
Oh no, that yet.
That's to come.
Delayed
Dr. Bonnie Henry and Junior
Justin
Horgan have opened the economy.
That's right.
Justin and I are having a preliminary discussion about that at our lunch this week. But he's
Yes, exactly.
Very nice. I love it.
We're planning an exit party in September.
Yes, this is a key message for founders that post-closing you need to celebrate with your team. You need to celebrate with your key management team members who've been through the war with you, with your advisors. Make sure your law firm picks up the tab, which Justin,
you heard it there first.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, just to say it, because I feel like Damon's been over complimentary, but honestly, both Catherine and Damon's success in getting their deals done are in large part related to how they negotiate and their willingness to be the front people, the decision makers, and actually to think a lot about the outcome and how to get there. You know, Damon, in your case, the value creation from how you approach the deal was huge. And I think that for the founders on the call to hear or to spend time with someone like Damon or Catherine in advance, if you don't think you have the confidence to go through a process, the decisions you make as the CEO are so important. Like, yes, the lawyers are helpful and we make you feel better, but at the end of the day, it's the founder and the CEO typically is the one who's going to ultimately make the decisions. Even with Catherine's board, it was Catherine who was the person who had to call the shot. And if you're not strategic and thoughtful and take a long view of it, you really can get steamrolled. So you need to have a huge amount of confidence and you need to think about it a lot and you need to be able to step back. And both of you said at different points in your deals, well, if this deal doesn't happen, that's fine, whatever. I'll just keep going and I'll build a bigger business and I'll sell to someone else. And you have to have that feeling. And if you don't have it, you'll ultimately just get, you get pummeled. So I think it's like, thanks for the compliments, but ultimately it really is the founder CEO that drives the ultimate strategic outcome.
Well, we were lucky because we did have a pretty active second option that was
Yeah.
going, hey, how's it going? How's it going? What's going on? What's going on?
Yeah.
And because I knew that was coming, it's still there. It was like, well, it hasn't gone away. So yeah,
That's fundamental.
I think we had a currency issue, like during the LOI process where our Europeans who are in euros were thinking that we were in Canadian, but turned out they forgot we were talking American, big difference. And then I think during the due diligence process, they were hoping that they could avoid their having to explain that issue. And so they ended up no issues in due diligence. So they're like, oh, now we can't change the price. So I was like, yeah, we're not changing the price. That's the price. And you don't like it, we're going to go do plan B. And that's kind of how it went.
Yeah, it's excellent to have that alternative at your disposal.
And plan B, like it can be fostered by yourself. Like you don't need someone else to be a middle agent. And that in fact probably would be my other tenet that I've kind of learned here, is that if you have an attractive offering, which is the reason why someone's coming after you in the first place, or you have that option to exit, that means there's probably others. But you get to make that choice on how that comes. So that network that you've formed is really important. And that would be something that events like this are really positive for, is that this is a network. Like you guys don't know who I am, now you do. If you send me an email, it might be delayed, but I'll probably respond. And that's one of the nice things. It's like a Steve Jobs thing where he's like, just ask. Doesn't hurt to ask. Like most people end up helping you if you just ask. Yeah. Worst comes to worst, you just don't get a response. The second thing I would say is your behavior up until that point is so fundamental to the way that people will treat you and the way that the deal will flow in respect to your partners, your board, anyone else that's relevant. So if you've been a jerk, you will pay that tax probably at that point where people don't trust you. And Justin, we had some pretty tense timelines, and sometimes my asks of my shareholders were frankly absurd. Like, can you just sign this? I don't know what it means, sign it, we just gotta get signed. Trust me. Like to get someone to that point where they just sign it, it requires trust. So really think about the way that you behave, especially with the key people in your team. Everyone's going to screw up. Everyone's going to say the wrong thing. Be the first to apologize. Be a good person. It does pay off big time. Yeah,
great words. And Damon, like you, Catherine got her shareholders executed in less than a day. And so obviously all of your investors were investing in you and your decision making, because they didn't, none of them sat down and said, I want to read the docs. So yeah.
It's a testament as well to the investor relations and that investment you made over time with your shareholders, so that they got to the point where it was time to truly to execute, that they believed in you more than reading a 100-page agreement.
It also helps that you both made them a lot of money, so that's always a good thing.
Always helpful. Always helpful.
And to quote Justin, to be clear, it was 277-page document. Nobody wondered that. But we prepped our cap table. We had a little window of time where we could reach out to them and say, in fact, then we got a delay, so it gave it another few days, so we could phone every one of them and say, you're going to get a DocuSign sometime in the next 48 hours. I need you just to click all the clicks and be done, and then you'll get some money, lots of money. And so they were happy. But we had, I don't know, Damon, how many you had? We had 127 people to get signatures from.
You had 127?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. No, I was very lucky. I think I was probably like 9 or something. So, yeah. Of which 2 were my family members. So really a lot easier. Yeah, no, that I couldn't even imagine actually at that level. That's incredible.
Very different cap tables.
Yeah.
Now let me do a quick time check. So Enoch, do we have questions that have been flowing in, or should we keep going with a few final questions?
Yeah, we actually still have some time left. We have one question that just came in, and the question is directed towards Catherine and Damon, which is, how did you manage providing the news of the acquisition to your employees, and what was the impact on culture post-acquisition?
You want to go first, Damon?
Can you say the first part again, Enoch?
Yeah, for sure. So it was, how did you manage providing the news of the acquisition to your employees?
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, that is like a thing in and of itself, because you want to keep them engaged but you're not allowed to really announce anything until you're allowed to announce things. And really what it came down to is because we're work from home, it's a lot easier to imagine because it's called Slack. And that's probably your only venue to initiate a meeting. I think the key thing that's really important there is depending on where your posture is and your stance, indicating the difference between like, we are moving to the next phase, we're gonna double down and do really great on the other side, versus you giving the indication to your team that you're checking out, that you've got a check, good luck guys, thanks for your service, see you later. We took, of course, the former approach, which is, this is exciting. Like, this is an opportunity now to get our product in front of so many people we couldn't even imagine. You guys are essential, and making them feel secure. And in our case, I could make them feel secure because there was no reason to lose any of our team members. So I think that messaging probably needs to be different because you want to be sincere depending on where you're at and where, if you're actually exiting this job, this career, or you're doubling down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my situation was quite a bit different. We were being bought by a publicly traded company. It was like very cryptic, and we had a very. In fact, I remember vividly that because it was over the weekend, and we were going to announce it before the European markets opened, which was in the middle of the night for us. And so it was like Justin's like and I had to describe this in Slack to my senior team at the time, saying, okay, at 9:45 p.m. on Sunday night, we will do this. And then at 10:01 p.m. Sunday night, we will do this. Then I was like, dun, 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 dun. It's like a dramatic movie. And what role will Kareem play in James Bond 008 or something? So that's what it felt like. So then people started putting Giphies in Slack about, but it really seemed so like it was that, like at this exact time we'll do this, and then this exact time we'll do this. And then we had a bunch of restructuring that went on Monday, so it was like a whole day wait. So it was just a bit nutty, but we had to, when that was all done, we could call, and we had told everybody about the acquisition, got all the signatures, but they didn't know who was buying us. So we had to wait till Sunday night to announce the name after all the signatures made it over. I can't remember exactly the order of events, yeah. But it was like here, the secret documents will slide from one law firm to another, and then we will announce the name to our shareholders, and then 5 minutes later we will announce it publicly, and then it went on the wire. And by Monday, it was in business in Vancouver, which was crazy because we were super public. Everything was out there. And then we could call a staff meeting the next morning and tell our team who it was. We had called a staff meeting to announce the acquisition, and we did it like online, and a few people were in the office. And we had a conversation about it without saying any names. And then the next one was who it was. And we took the same approach. Obviously, I'm here for a few more years. I want my team to stick with me. And so it was the same approach, because they're not absorbing us into something, that they're wanting us to be a foundation of something for them, because Quadient is a mail service business, and they're digitizing, and so they're moving into the software space, and so they need us to be there. They need our expertise. They need all of our people to stay. So they were keen on putting out all the benefits of being part of a larger entity with 6,000 employees globally, and lots of opportunity within Beanworks as well as within Quadient as a larger entity. So yeah, that's kind of how we did it.
That messaging and that integration is so key in terms of a successful acquisition. It's one thing to get to closing. It's then what you do to keep your team incented, keep your team excited about that next chapter is equally important.
And Mark, just one last final word from me on this. And I know I think we're close out of time, but I think what you both did well is formally or informally use equity incentive or bonusing to give everybody a little bit of a sweetener. So, it didn't transform everybody's life, but it was a meaningful financial event for lots and lots and lots of people, including your staff. And so I think that it just makes you feel more part of the team. And I think in Canada and in Vancouver, I think sometimes equity comp plans are undervalued by employees, because the theory is, well, nobody ever really gets to realize on the options unless you're at Shopify or whatever, So I think getting the message out on these kinds of events where we talk to Vancouver companies who have had successful exits and where their employees have made some money, I think it spreads the message too, that an employee option shareholder can do well if the founders, allow people to participate in cash or in shares through the deal. So I think you both did that very well.
think that's a good segue to wrap things up. Enoch, I think we're at the hour.
Yes,
So,
we are. We're right at the 4 o'clock mark. So I wanted to
okay.
take this time to thank everyone for just being part of Vancouver Startup Week. A huge shout out to Catherine and Damon just for giving such insightful, candid stories into what it is like to lead through an exit. And I personally just really enjoyed some of these moments you don't think about, like not setting up the LOI or being aware of it, or even just the like different cultural differences of dealing with public companies from different countries. And so as a founder myself, it was really helpful to kind of be able to think through these things. So yeah, definitely we'll have to pick some of your brains soon. And once again, thank you, Mark and Justin, for representing Osler and just for leading this wonderful session.